Is it Zach? How are you? Good morning and welcome. Happy Monday. Today is Monday, May 18th, 2026, and I welcome you to our work session today for the Larimer County Board of County Commissioners here in our conference room at our Larimer County Administrative Services Building in Fort Collins. Today we have a work session on the Housing Action Plan. I am Larimer County Commissioner Jody Shaw McNally, Chair of the Board of County Commissioners. I'm joined at the conference table by Commissioner John Gonzalez and Commissioner Kristen Stevens. Also, our county manager is at the table, Lorenda Volker, and we have other people in the audience, but we will go ahead today and just turn this over for introductions from our housing Stability Manager, Aaliyah Rodriguez. Aaliyah, I'll let you turn this over to you and let you introduce everyone. And I'm looking forward to our presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning. As stated, my name is Aaliyah Rodriguez. I'm the Housing Stability Manager here at Larimer County. And we're here to have a discussion today to set priorities for Larimer County's Housing Action Plan. As a reminder, Senate Bill 24-174 passed in 2024, and this bill requires that Larimer County do two things. It requires that we complete a housing needs assessment by December 31st of 2026, and Larimer County opted in to create a regional housing needs assessment, which means we created this in partnership with Fort Collins, with the City of Fort Collins and the City of Loveland to ensure collaboration and coordination across our region. The regional housing needs assessment has been submitted to DOLA for review and approval, and we'll be needing to update that needs assessment every 6 years henceforth. The second piece of that legislation is to use that housing needs assessment to create a housing action plan by January 2028. The housing action plan and the housing needs assessment are meant to work in tandem and utilizing that assessment data to create that plan. And this is our conversation to set those strategies. A jurisdiction's housing action plan needs to include at minimum 2 affordability strategies, 1 long-term affordability strategy, and 1 displacement mitigation strategy. So I'm going to hand it over now. We had hired Root Policy Research to complete our regional housing needs assessment, and they will also be assisting us in completing our housing action plan. So Molly Fitzpatrick is here today, and she's going to remind us about the gaps that we found in our needs assessment and what we need to set for priorities for this action plan today.
Welcome, Molly.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Appreciate the opportunity, and thanks, Aaliyah, for the intro and kind of refresh from a process perspective on where we are. So today's goal, as Aaliyah mentioned, is that we're really going to focus on discussing the housing action plan. This is I think we view this as an opportunity to really hear from you what direction and priorities you would like to set for the county as it relates to housing strategies, priorities, and actions moving forward. And so this is primarily a discussion as we move into this, the housing action plan, kind of a brief outline here. Obviously, this is building on the housing needs assessments. We'll also be discussing progress on housing, addressing housing issues, goals and actions, and then what the implementation steps are for that. So today we're just going to spend a very brief 10 minutes on a quick recap of the housing needs, just so we're kind of all level set and refreshed on what the findings were from that as we roll into a conversation, which will take the bulk of our time today, is really a discussion around recommendations. We'll build on the recommendations that were in the housing needs assessment, or we'll use that as a framework to have a conversation around priorities. That doesn't mean you're locked in exactly to those recommendations as they're listed, but it's a great way for us to just kind of walk through some of the options within kind of your toolkit of what to prioritize for housing needs. So we'll spend most of our time today with that. But as a quick recap, I want to actually start with the housing needs dashboard. So this was one of the outputs from that housing needs assessment, is an interactive online dashboard that that kind of summarizes those needs or puts forth some of the highest level needs for folks to see. And I'm going to just quick link there is a link to that in the presentation, and I'm just going to pull it up so everyone can see kind of where it is. So this lives on the Larimer County website, kind of within the Office of Housing Stability, and drilling down from there, it is an interactive dashboard. So you can see here, the way this works is there's some sort of drop down, so you can say, oh, well, let's take a look at what LaPorte's needs are, and then the dashboard, of course, will change as you move into that. Across the bottom, there's a handful of different pages that you can look at, or that different jurisdictions can look at to evaluate kind of what the needs are as it relates to the county overall. You know, we've talked about this before, but one thing we look at is kind of this affordability gaps to really understand where in terms of AMI are the greatest needs. And we found that in the rental market within Larimer County, the greatest needs that you have are below 50% of area median income, or AMI. On the purchase side or the for sale side, the greatest demand is below 120% AMI. So when we think about interventions or potential public sector action, those are kind of the price points that we primarily want to focus on. But of course, there are needs across the full housing spectrum, as we talked about as well. And so on this production needs tab, you can kind of see how those break out in terms of the total units forecasted to be needed. Right now, this is showing the county overall. If you just want to look at unincorporated areas, that's also an option, just changing the drop down, and that shifts as well. So as we roll into our conversation today, we're kind of keeping those primary needs in mind. And I'll hop back to the presentation, but obviously that website is right there for anyone that would like to kind of jump in and play with that. I also just want to acknowledge that the NOCO Foundation did just release a housing report as well, called Housing at a Crossroads. That is sort of a joint look at both Weld and Larimer County, so really looking at needs across the whole northern Colorado area. Those findings are really consistent. They use this pretty similar methodology to look at those. So we appreciate that they're also highlighting that in sort of a different format, and just want to acknowledge that is also out there as a great resource for folks that are really looking at needs across the entire kind of economic area of Northern Colorado as well. And I've got a couple slides just as a quick refresh on kind of what we heard from residents and stakeholders as well around housing needs, just to kind of jog all of our memories collectively as we roll into a discussion. But one of the questions we asked in the survey, and we talked about this last time I was here as well, was what would make you feel more secure in your housing situation. For renters, there was a lot of appetite for how can I figure out how to become a homeowner, so lots of supports there, but also pretty good indicators of need related to just monthly rental assistance as well. And then on the ownership side, also looking for opportunities to make critical repairs and support doing that. Across the board, throughout the region, throughout the entire county, there was really strong response from residents saying they are willing to do something to create more affordability. Some of that was land use related and neighborhood change related, so looking for opportunities within their neighborhood to increase housing diversity, which can bring affordability, as well as an appetite for financial contribution to a housing fund. In terms of priorities, I mean, I think we talked about this one as last time as well. So there's not a clear winner in terms of priorities. It was sort of all of the above across the board. So when you look at kind of the gold bar on top, that's the county as a whole. When you look at sort of the lightest blue bar on the bottom, that is sort of elsewhere in Larimer County, which is primarily unincorporated, but a few of the smaller incorporated areas as well. So certainly an appetite for public sector programs and support of programs through the nonprofit sector as well that ensure middle and low income residents have access to housing. Homeless prevention was a top priority as well, and then transition into ownership. Stakeholders, we talked with stakeholders about barriers to development, which includes construction costs, financing costs. So lots of sort of private market barriers that make it hard to deliver affordable housing, but also looking at some things on the policy side, community opposition, infrastructure constraints, zoning barriers. Stakeholders, especially in the service sector, really highlighted that there are some gaps in services which can affect residents with the greatest needs. Some of that was related to limited emergency shelter beds and temporary housing options with wraparound services. Transportation challenges came up a good bit, especially in rural and mountain areas, and then access to programs as well. The solutions that were primarily highlighted by stakeholders included expanding rental and utility assistance, aligning programs with the needs that we found as part of the data analysis, and improving service access in rural areas, as well as just continuing to support the local collaborative networks that have been effective. So great nonprofits in the area, great service providers, and just continuing to build on those partnerships and relationships and making sure the programs that are working are staying funded and are staying accessible to residents as well. So with that, that's my quick 10-minute recap. So hopefully that was just a helpful refresher. And really, we'd like to kind of jump in and spend the rest of the time really talking through your perspectives on those. But I'm happy to pause here for a moment first and take some questions.
I have a question. I'll see if my colleagues have any questions. Commissioner Stevens?
The only question I have is that, and maybe we'll start, I think we'll start discussing this, but like, Is the bill that you mentioned earlier the one that that's not the Prop 123 bill, or no? So there's also like that, like when we talk about the housing plan, will we talk about sort of how we're going to hit some of the new goals that were achieved in this year's update of the Prop 123?
In terms of addressing, like, so you have a Prop 123 goal, right, of number of units to be built. And yes, the recommendations that we're putting forth are designed to help you achieve those. We're not explicitly saying, okay, these are the exact tools you need to hit those, because you can kind of target those with a wide range of needs. But certainly that is one of the objectives of the strategies that we'll be talking through. Aaliyah, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just add that if you want explicit language around Prop 123 in the plan itself, we can add that in. A lot of them are going to naturally align with it. And also keep in mind that Prop 123 is a 3-year cycle and our action plan's a 6-year cycle. So we don't want to bind the 6-year cycle into 3-year goals either.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily need explicit language that calls out Prop 123, just knowing that in these goals, we are trying to hit those numbers to be able to keep accessing those dollars as they are available.
Great.
Yep, absolutely.
Is that the last of your questions, Commissioner Stevens? Commissioner Cafalas, you have a question, sir?
Yes, thank you. Actually, I have two questions. The first one regarding stakeholder perspectives and what would you do for more affordability? And keeps coming up more and more these days, a dedicated stream of revenue. Related to that topic, what has been determined as a dollar amount that would make a difference, and how the county participating in that, in whatever way we determine, could leverage other dollars to actually bring us to an amount that would get us to that 17,000 plus over the next 10 years? That's my first set of questions.
We have not calculated a specific dollar amount that you would need to generate. That is something that we can take a look at. We've done that for other communities in past. I can tell you that, for example, Boulder County has a sales tax, right, that's dedicated specifically to housing that raises about $15 to $17 million a year for them. And so we can add some of that context. It's really hard to quantify. The number to address the full needs is massive, right? And so it really comes down to what can we prioritize and then how can we get there?
Absolutely. I think that analysis would be helpful. And in relation to that, Madam Chair, in relation to that, how whatever the county may be able to help with, how does that create a leveraging or a synergy with other potential sources for municipalities? And if I may, my second question,
Yes.
I'll be quick. What is it? Oh yes. And Molly, you'll probably recall this question, but where does so on the some of us perceive as low-hanging fruit, there's a lot of older housing stock where, especially older adults, especially in rural areas, where does weatherization, energy efficiency fit into this scheme as it relates to lowering energy bills, which is one way of achieving affordability?
Yes, absolutely. So we certainly want to talk about that. There are programs that are in place doing some of those things, and we'll talk about that. I mean, we usually think about that kind of under the category of housing stabilization, so direct support to homeowners that need those services.
Okay, thank you kindly.
Absolutely.
Nice to see you.
Yeah.
I have some questions. Thank
Great.
you. My first question is, when they talk in the recommendations, assist and stabilize existing households through program support, did they say which program support and where do they think the money should come from?
Yeah, so I would say program support, primarily what we heard from stakeholders was sort of existing programs. That doesn't necessarily mean the county should fully own those programs. I think the stakeholders primarily felt like the county has a role in funding those nonprofits that are administering those services and making sure that those programs are staying well funded. Some of that can be through federal funds. Some of that could be through local funds. So I think primarily what we heard is the county role there is to provide the funding and then provide. Continuing to convene, make sure we've got look for gaps in service provision, right? So a lot of times we have service providers that are pretty focused on their program deployment, which is fantastic. But sometimes the broader role of, for example, county or other cities as well is to say, okay, it seems like nobody's providing this service, or we have 3 people providing this service, and so just to make sure that there's coordination and efficiency within that as well. Aaliyah, did you want to add anything in there?
So I'd like to build on top of that. I think people think there's money that the county has to fund this, but we are making cuts.
Sure.
In our human services, HR 1, there can be a lot of cuts. There can be a lot of issues. We do not have money. So was there any education with this or some recognition that the county is having to cut and maybe losing the ability to support some of these? And it's going to have to be a collaboration of services and watch for not being duplicative services and really trying to collaborate. Was there any kind of education? Because I think people think that the county just has this magic pot of money, which does not exist and has never existed, to fund these things. They're great programs, but we're trying to keep what we have in place, which is, as we're looking forward to all these things and rising fuel costs and stuff. So I'm wondering about the education or the knowledge of that, because I don't want folks, the stakeholders, think somehow we're going to come to save the day.
Yes, no, fantastic point. And absolutely, at least in our conversations with stakeholders, I think they are well aware of the financial constraints currently within the county and understand that's not an easy ask at all. I think their focus was more on, okay, if we can, as a region, dedicate funding to housing, here is how we would like to see that deployed. So a lot of those conversations were contingent on the other kind of recommendation of, is there a funding source that we can leverage? And so acknowledging that doesn't just mean reallocating existing funds, acknowledging that is a no small sort of endeavor to say, okay, is there an opportunity to look at a funding source option? And if that were in place, how would we deploy that to better address needs?
Okay, thank you for that, because I do think we want to be careful that people set expectations, because, plus I think I think overall also the cities and municipalities need to have kind of maybe partner and collaborate, because we shouldn't, I don't feel like sometimes we should always be seen to be fixing housing, because we don't build houses. And
Right.
So we don't, so I just want to say that. So the other question I had real quick was the graph, I'm looking for it, where it said, on the page 9, where it talked about elsewhere in Larimer County. Does that mean other smaller municipalities, or does that also include the next slide?
This one?
No, the next one. No, the.
Oh, wrong way.
that
Here,
one.
right here. Yes.
Yeah, so it's,
Yep.
so elsewhere in Larimer County, does that include other smaller municipalities and unincorporated?
Yes, it does. In this graphic, it does. Yep. So in this graphic, elsewhere in Larimer County means anywhere in Larimer County other than Fort Collins and Loveland. So this was based on survey data. It's much harder in survey data for us to really drill down into who's actually living in unincorporated areas versus incorporated areas, partly because residents tend to view where they live as a postal address as opposed to kind of an incorporation.
Okay. And then my last question, and I see your hand, Commissioner Kafalis.
I just want to make a comment.
You want to comment on my question?
No, I want to comment on, I'll wait till you're done with your question.
If you don't mind, thank you. And then when we talk about the, looking at the rentals and that combination between Weld and Larimer County, looking at that, there's also that thread to pull out, who's commuting, who's not commuting in public transportation, because some folks can afford to maybe to live in Weld County but work here. That's probably not able to be pulled out and looked at more closely as we look at this, or are you making I guess it'll be in the recommendations, but I'm wondering about that, if this is part of that analysis with the rentals.
Are you referencing specifically the NOCO Foundation report, or?
Well, just as
just in
you all, did
general?
you just focus on Larimer County and not look at kind of that regional?
So I would say both. Like from in the needs assessment, we do look at commute flows between Weld County and Larimer County, and when we calculate the projections, so you can see kind of the bottom bullet here is from our report that's looking at Larimer County's production needs over 10 years. That's for the whole county right there. That projection does account for job growth specifically in Larimer County, but it assumes that some of that job growth is likely to be filled by in-commuters. So we're not allocating all of the job growth just to housing your workers. So we're kind of saying, well, if we maintain similar commute flows looking forward and you're growing jobs by this much, then that proportion. So all that to say, yes, it is a factor. We do look at those commute flows and try to evaluate how does that actually impact how much Larimer County needs to grow versus how much Weld County needs to grow, and acknowledging that Weld County is growing faster right now, right, than Larimer County.
My last quick question, housing affordability is more than just the construction and utility costs. Affordability of homeowners insurance is a really big factor, in my opinion, that I've been working on for a few years. Was that looked at or addressed or thought about? Because those costs have been rising for all of us across the whole state, but especially in a high-risk area as Larimer County. I was wondering about that. And you can answer that later if you want or now.
Sure. I mean, I'll answer it briefly. Right now, we do look at some of those costs as a proportion of total ownership cost to kind of evaluate how hard is it to be a homeowner in that construct. As we roll into strategies, I would love to hear your thoughts on kind of where there are opportunities potentially for the county to play a role. That is a real challenge, especially in Colorado right now in general, on just access to insurance in addition to the cost of insurance. And so understanding those, I think some of that is going to be let's see if the state can move forward on some of those issues, but very much welcome any conversation around what strategies the county may be able to push forward in that regard too.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Gonzalez, your question or comment, sir.
Just to mention, in relation to the discussion a moment ago, in reviewing the data dashboard very briefly, didn't have a whole lot of time. It does, if you click on those tabs underneath, you can go into overall unincorporated Larimer County, but then I think it's very helpful that you can go to each municipality, Berthoud, Loveland, the smaller ones, Wellington, and I think that's very helpful. I just wanted to point that out, that's all.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Great. Okay. So with that, we're just going to roll into a conversation around the recommendations and action items. As I mentioned before, this is not intended to be already figured out in terms of recommendations. We just felt like this was a helpful structure to kind of walk through some of those things. So as we have this conversation, we very much welcome different ideas about how to organize it, different ideas about if you feel like there's policies that we may be missing or programs you want to make sure and highlight. We are more than welcome those conversations. This is kind of a bullet list of questions. It's not intended to be something that we're going to walk through individually or exhaustively, but we feel like these are helpful questions or helpful prompts as we roll through the next slides where we're talking through some of those recommendations, just to keep this kind of framework in mind. So some of the things that we would love to hear from you are, as we talk about recommendations, what do you think are the biggest priorities among those recommendations, but also within those recommendations, right? And how do you really want to see those operationalized? It's easy for us to say, oh yeah, prioritize regional coordination. What does that really look like to you all? What do you think are the priorities within that, and how that might kind of like boots on the ground, what does that look like? Any policies or programs you've seen or heard about in peer counties that you want to make sure we explore, we want to put that on our list. We are at the beginning of this process, not the end. So we are really rolling into what does this look like? Let's build this out. So anything that you want us to take a look at, please put it on our list. As you think about kind of what's already going on in the county that either is sort of county action or that municipalities are doing, what's working well, what do you feel like is missing from kind of the holistic approach that's happening right now? Or as you look at these action items, are we missing something big that we didn't think about that you may want to bring to our attention? These last two questions are questions we often ask policymakers. What on this list gives you some heartburn, and what on this list are you really excited about? So as we roll through those, keep those questions in mind. We're not going to like bullet list every single one as we go through, but I think they're kind of a helpful framework or maybe some helpful prompts as we think about this discussion. So what I'd like to start with is this is the high-level look at the 7 recommendations that are in the H&A. And so I'd like to start on this slide with just which of these kind of high-level buckets of tools or kind of broad themes of recommendations within these, what do you think should be prioritized? Where do you see the county's role most specifically? And then the rest of the presentation is really taking each of these one by one and drilling down on some specific actions within that. So if I may, let's start with kind of these 7. I'll do a quick read through, and then we can just talk about which of these do you think should we prioritize for. And right now we're talking specifically about county level action, right? So Fort Collins is doing their own housing action plan. Loveland is doing their own housing action plan. Estes Park is doing their own housing action plan. So there will be really specific actions that those municipalities are drilling down as well. And so this is really focused on kind of county role, county action, county sphere of influence as well. So as a quick reminder, the 7 recommendations that were at the kind of end of the H&A were continuing regional collaboration and public-private partnerships. Number 2, consider funding source options. Number 3, allocate publicly owned land to affordable mixed income development. Number 4, preserve existing housing, so that's already serving low and moderate income households, so not just build new, but what do we do to maintain affordability for existing homes? Number 5, look at land use and zoning modifications to unlock supply and increase housing diversity. Number 6, refine or expand development incentives for affordable housing. And number 7, assist and stabilize existing households through program support. So with that, I'll turn back to you guys for some discussion on these. What priorities do you have within these?
Commissioner Kafals, let you go first, sir.
Well, thank you. What exactly are you asking for? Because this is hard.
Yeah,
This is, we have 32 minutes. The way I process is I don't do fast-paced things, so I just want to point that out. But what exactly are you asking for? Like, of the top 7 recommendations, to narrow that down, or revise the order of prioritization? Well, this is not.
it's not in a prioritized order. And so I guess
asking.
my question on this is, are there specific, of these 7 recommendations, which are the ones you think are most critical for the county to lead on or for the county to execute? Are there ones that you would deprioritize, or are there ones that you would elevate of this list to say, hey, county should really focus here? And if it's easier, I realize this is starting at a really high conceptual level. If you'd prefer, we could say, let's start with number 1 and dig into number 1.
I guess I can offer some overarching comments, perhaps.
Sure, that'd be great.
I think that some of the criteria or parameters we should keep in mind are, number 1, what builds on what builds on existing work that's being done and serves as a catalyst for that work that's being done. A second criterion parameter might be, in the scheme of things, whether it's dedicated source of revenue or other things, what's realistic and practical. A third thing is, an important role of maybe I have 4 things and I can stop, Madam Chair. That's the best I can do. Well, I think, am I on number 3?
You are. I have you on number 3 right now.
My parameters criterion thing.
I've got what builds on existing work and what's realistic and practical.
Yeah, and the existing work would be, certainly we're already in the midst of updating land use codes and doing all that kind of, just continuing to push on that as much as we can. But I think the collaboration one, we do a lot of that. We have that through the continuum of care, Northern Colorado Continuum of Care. How do we expand that? And, perhaps one model, and we may have looked at this, and that is, there's a lot of regional cooperation, collaboration that goes on in the economic and workforce development space. And of course, the 2 issues are integrally linked. So I would offer that we need to really work on that. And to the point of the chair, the intersection between the fact that folks, to afford a place to rent or afford a place to buy, they have to go out to Sterling now, and that's a pretty long commute. So I would offer that as the 4th thing. Oh, and then the low-hanging fruit thing. And I think it's important to look at the older housing stock and figure out ways to, make sure we're preventing people from becoming homeless. So emergency assistance is important. And how do we help people offset their heating and energy bills, especially these days when everything is so darn expensive, electricity, heat, and all the rest. And again, we have that, you were up there, older housing stock, and how do we expand what the, what is it called? The Energy Resource Center that I'll visit now in August, I suppose. So those kinds of, that's the best I can do at the moment. Thanks, Madam Chair.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Stevens?
Yeah, so I'll just start by saying we absolutely need to do this work, and it's really important to our community members. They clearly tell us time and time again when we survey that they need help, that people need help with their rents, they need help finding affordable housing, they need help purchasing a home, they need, and a lot of that is how do we get that right mix of stock of housing. And so I think continuing the regional collaboration is really important. How do we connect into the municipal plans so that we are all working towards the same goal? Because I feel like there's a lot of initiatives and efforts out there, and I know, Aaliyah, you're working on this, how do we make sure that we're all working towards the same goal and that because most of the housing stock we honestly want are near the growth management areas where there's public transportation available, where there's sanitary sewer systems, all the things that are. It doesn't mean we don't need some agricultural homes and that we don't need some homes in some of the non-incorporated areas, But like, what does it look like to get the right kind of stock we need in those different areas? So I love the regional collaboration. We've talked about the HUD consortium, which I think is something that, it's interesting because I went to the HUD's website and I was looking at information on the consortium, and there's some information, but there's not a ton. And at least the last time I checked, they hadn't released like communities that had done that and maybe some of the outcomes. So that I think is really good to pursue, because I think that is a funding source that we could potentially tap into that could bring us up to, I think Aaliyah had mentioned, up to $500,000 extra a year. That is worth pursuing because those are dollars that are not our dollars. Although luckily with the bills that have passed this legislative session, we actually could use, when we have extra ad valorem dollars, we can use them for housing now, which is also a good outcome. I think funding source options are great. I think that that's something that there is a lot of gap funding needed for projects. So I think that that is definitely something that we should pursue. And I think our community members are also asking us for that as well, including our nonprofit partners. I hate to say like sort of all of the above, but I mean, I think for me, kind of what we think moves the needle the most, because we do need more housing stock in our community. And, it's interesting how we talk about this, because we need more homes for people. I mean, it's not housing stock, right? These are homes for people. Like, I have 3 children, this is not about my children, this is about everybody's children and everybody who lives in our community. But like, even to just keep up with the people that live here and the children that they have to be able to live in the community, we're not keeping up in that way. And so, and we're certainly not keeping up from an affordability stance. So, we want people to have homes in our community that live here, and we're not even keeping up with the people that live here currently, let alone anybody who might come in for new jobs that are created. So, it's important that we keep that in mind as we do this work. There again, I'm definitely 1 and 2 are really important to me. If we have publicly owned land that we can allocate, sure. I don't know where that is, but, when we think about not having parking minimums, I mean, I feel like there's parking lots that can be converted to housing, and so I'm all about some of that. And then as far as land use and zoning, I mean, we've already implemented some of the stuff that we were required to do. So definitely willing to take a look at that if there are other things that we need to do. But also, like, one of the things that I'm kind of curious about is this idea of, we created the cottage cluster kind of model, and it's a bit of a plug and play, like, here's something that would be a pre-approved model, housing. And I mean, what does that look like to have sort of pre-approved plans? I don't know. I know some people who are working on this in different communities, but sort of like, okay, you don't have to start from scratch. If you're a small developer, this is what that might look like and this is what works. And, the great thing about the cottage cluster plan is that worked with having, you didn't need the sanitary sewer system. That was plotted for, I think, 2 acres, a certain amount of homes. You could still have septic. So, what does it look like to have those kind of plans? And then, really concentrating on sort of how do we get developers to say the size of housing is not necessarily what folks need anymore, right? I mean, how are we right-sizing our housing stock to fit the demographics of an aging population that may need smaller houses and also really accessible houses? A younger population that's not having as many children, if they're having any children at all. That's the stock that I think is really missing in our communities. And then how do we work with sort of existing, like when we're talking about funding options, how do we work with, like, I'm thinking about, we were able to get some middle income housing in the Urban Renewal Authority plan on North College. We worked with, how do we creatively use some of these dollars that are available to us or that are available to municipalities to make some of those things happen? Because middle income housing often doesn't pencil out. And then, conversations with the developers about what would make things pencil out, right? Because if there are still things that are in our codes or in our permitting process that are barriers to things penciling out, would be really great to understand where their challenges lie. And I think that's it for me for now. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
So, these are the top ones for me. Assist and stabilize existing household through program support. I think we had a lot of success with some of the grant dollars we got with the rental assistance. I think it's really important to keep people housed, and, one paycheck away from, being unhoused. I think I think you would, correct me if I'm wrong, Leah, you said that $1,500 assistance saved 20,000 or more in folks, the resources to get them back to house. So it was really a really big internal investment. And I mean investment because we want to keep people housed and certainly families and children housed. So I think that would be one. I think preserving existing homes serving low and moderate incomes. I think that there's certainly some success that we've seen in helping keeping those homes moderate incomes. I know a lot of these downtown, and I'm not going to call out, but there's a certain downtown area where a lot of folks have started to buy these smaller homes that maybe might be affordable for someone, but they buy that house that has this huge large and then they scrape it and make it into this big, huge, area. And so I think trying to work with municipalities to maybe look at that and how we help preserve that, because maybe it could be turned into more of a mixed use in the cities, but I don't know. So I don't think right now, we have all these IGAs and growth management areas, and I think that's where our focus should be, because I think any publicly owned land, we're going to have to do infrastructure, transportation, roads, and I think that, to me, is probably on the bottom of the list, because I think that we need to really look at where housing needs to be. I think we should have a more targeted approach. We had a state demographer here who really showed that our growth is slowing down and had some things flipped. Right now, we need more units than population. It's going to flip in 2016. We'll have more units than people. And I think so we really need to target kind of that middle income, and the nurses, the doctors, the teachers, the firefighters, even doctors I've heard some can't afford to live in certain areas. And so I think being very targeted about having that thriving economy and that workforce development and having folks be able to live where they work, it makes a really important, thriving community. Because certainly we see what happens when our workforce is displaced because of pricing and things. I think that's really important. So I wouldn't want to have a lot of money spent on sprawl. Certainly the Farmland Institute, which I attended with the Rural Action Caucus for the National Association of Counties, had a wonderful website that showed if you don't have targeted growth and have some good policy, it just has the sprawl and you lose important farmland. And I think that's really important. We also have to think about that, because we need to be able to have maybe a food grown closer to where, and have residents have access to that for a lot of reasons. And so what I don't see on here and talking about is where we're going to get the water. So I think that's missing. That's a conversation. Where is the water coming from? We need to be having that hard conversation. And I've asked this for a few years, and I know that's not on you all because this is kind of a community development thing. But what is adequate water for a household? I have a certain, our kids have moved away, but we still have a large allocation. We're being very careful when we're tracking our water usage every day, because we're watering and we're starting our farming and stuff. But we use dripper. We have all these things, but not everyone can afford to do that. Some of these apps are free and stuff, but what is really going to take? And we know we have a lot, our water master plan shows there's a lot of water providers, and we've seen that already, where you can't have wells on some of these out and unincorporated because they're too small and they're already not doing water taps. I don't hear any conversation about the cost of water and how much that costs for building these homes. And I think that, along with insurance, is driving a lot of affordability issues. So we can build and build, and there's a lot of folks I've been talking to, and after being at a national conference and about how they're building to all the natural disasters, I think that's part of it as well. Is we have had some natural disasters, and that drives insurance costs, and people are displaced. And how do we keep those folks here? And so I think that's really important to me, is how do we keep our current folks here so they don't get pushed out. And so I think I think we've already done, a public land allocation and implement land use and zoning. We've already done that. We've done a lot of it. I'm not so sure we need to do more right now. Let's see if it's working before we keep changing things more, because I'm a really big local control cow, and I feel like we have sacrificed a lot of that for policies that maybe work for Denver, but they don't work for here. And I think we need to look at what is working now and get used to that, and because we made a lot of changes over the last 5 years. Let's just work with what we have, because we've done a lot more than a lot of folks have, and how are we going to get that to work? We need to now implement those and implement them well and try out driving those things. And so that's some of my thoughts on this. I think these are a lot of recommendations, but I think what we have built on, what we should build on is what we've had great success with. And also our land use we've already done a lot. We had that housing and needs assessment. We had that look at our land use code. And we're doing this transfer of development rights. We got a lot of going up, and I think asking our staff to look at even more changing. We're working on some other things that got pushed aside so we could do this work because it was required. I think we need to let that settle and solidify before we start making more changes and have more things for staff to have to work on when we have some other land use code things that need to be dealt with. And so that's kind of my thoughts on that. So Commissioner Kafalas, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And now that I've had a little more time to process and my synapses have been a lot more time to fire, I just wanted to offer a couple of additional thoughts, maybe a little bit more specific. I think there's a pretty good alignment amongst the three of us. Certainly the matter of housing choices, that we hear that a lot, the whole continuum of housing availability. But I do want to, number 4, about preserving existing housing. I haven't heard any mention of naturally occurring affordable housing, such as manufactured housing communities, and whatever we can do to support those communities to keep their lot rents affordable and their homes and their infrastructure in reasonable shape. I wanted to add that. Also, with regard to what we'll be hearing this afternoon, an update on our transfer of development rights program. There's a lot of alignment there with, creating some affordable housing incentives. So I'm hoping those two, what we're doing on the affordable housing incentive side aligns with our TDR, and I think you know what I'm talking about. Thirdly, the two bills that passed this session, there were a myriad of bills, but House Bill 261001, which looks at, I think it's meant to allow for more repurposing of public spaces that could potentially be used for housing. Maybe that fits in with the TDR program. But I'd really like us to look at that. And Senate Bill 26001, which actually I think gives us more latitude to use general fund or property tax revenue. So those bills were passed, and actually how might we operationalize that or implement some of that, in the county? And I think that relates to maybe we've done this, Aaliyah, an inventory of potential properties that might fit in those categories of House Bill 1001. And then finally, I'll just offer 2 anecdotes I think that are relevant on the matter of water. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think we recently received an email from somebody who was really upset. They're trying to build a house, and the water tap alone apparently is going to cost $90,000. So I think that brings it home. And then the other thought I wanted to share, in my neighborhood, which is in the Martinez Park neighborhood, which is getting gentrified, and that's a whole nother issue. But there's an example of a house that went on the market. A friend of mine who passed away, and they are selling his home, a very nice home. It was on the market for a brief amount of time. The market price was $648. And I think the fact that it was under $700,000 near Old Town, it was probably a big selling point. And that gets back to the home ownership and what's affordable, and the 120%, that's where there's a real gap, and what the market can bear at 150% of AMI. Those are my additional thoughts. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. That covered a ton of ground for us already, so that is super, super helpful. I think where I would like to follow up with a couple of deeper dive questions are probably around I think regional collaboration, everybody's on board. I think we've got a clear direction on that. I'd like to talk a little bit more about funding source options. I think we're pretty clear on publicly owned land, so kind of acknowledging we've looked at that and that sort of thing. And then I would like to talk a little bit more about preservation. So number 2 and number 4, I'd like to spend a little bit more time on. I think everybody's, I'm hearing consensus for the most part from you guys on land use and zoning as well as incentives. Like, hey, we've done what we've kind of already executed this. Let's continue to monitor. But I don't think we necessarily need a deeper dive conversation on those, if you guys are okay with that. And then I would love to close out with number 7, just making sure we have, I think I heard mostly, let's continue what's working on assist and stabilize, so we don't need a ton of time there. But if you all are amenable to that, I'd love to spend, maybe 5 minutes on number 2, 5 minutes on number 4, and then wrap with number 7.
Yeah, and I just want to do a time check, and again, I know we're probably running out of time, but we do have another work session at 11.
Yep.
And I'd like to end maybe a minute or two just a little early so that we
Sure.
can move people in and out, just because I have a meeting at 12 that I have to walk across the street for, and so I'm trying to just build a little bit of breathing room for all of us, but
Great.
certainly important conversations, and I would suggest that maybe if we have further questions, we could forward those to Alida. Maybe you both
Absolutely.
could come back to all three of us with your answers, so I just want
Absolutely.
to offer that. Thank you
That's
very much.
fantastic. Yep. And so is everybody okay if we talk a little bit about number 2, a little bit about number 4, and wrap with number 7? I think we can knock that out in the next 12 minutes if we're on board. So in terms of funding source, I think we've talked about that. Everybody has mentioned Senate Bill 26001. We're tracking that as well. That's the one that says you can use general funds a little bit more easily for housing. So that's kind of on here, is just continue to monitor that. I also understand that doesn't mean you all of a sudden have a giant pot of money to spend on housing. So as we look at this one, are there specific considerations that you all would like us to take on kind of what do we do short term versus what do we do long term in terms of funding housing? And then how do we, where can we sort of look for either short term or long term, but those needs that you have been funding with that you previously funded with ARPA funds, that's gone away. Any specific things you all want us to take a look at as part of this? And we'll keep it tight here, but just want to make sure we're asking, is there a specific direction you'd like? We can kind of just give you all the options also, but.
Commissioner Stevens, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, the HUD, the Home Consortium, I don't know if there's any disadvantage to doing this, so that's, I guess, my curiosity is like, do we feel like the Fort Collins and Loveland would be supportive of that? And do we need to do any work on our end to make that happen?
Yeah, I think that's still to be determined. We've started the conversations of what that could look like. There are different HUD timelines that City of Fort Collins and City of Loveland currently adhere to, so just trying to line that up. So this goal isn't going to happen this year or maybe even next year. It's something that we need to align with their plans that they have to submit to HUD, but we've started those conversations to explore, and it will be Fort Collins is the leader in our area for the home funds and the CDBG funds. So it'll be collaborating closely with them to help see the advantages for the region.
Okay, yeah, definitely, hope we're continuing to look into that, because I think there again, that's a sort of untapped resource and not money that we have to necessarily take out of our own pocket beyond sort of creating MOUs or IGAs with the communities. And there again, if it benefits affordable housing, I think that, both councils I would imagine would be supportive if we can make that happen. And then as far as, exploring some kind of dedicated funding, I think for housing ultimately is a really good goal for us. I don't know what exactly that looks like, but I think having some dollars to be able to at least continue existing programs, but potentially, fill in some gap funding on projects that are really important. We did that with ARPA dollars, and there's a lot of projects across the county that we can point to that we helped bring to fruition because of those ARPA dollars and that gap funding. Knowing that middle income housing has even sometimes more severe gaps because of, not being able to access all the affordable, right? And I think we need to build both. There's needs for both, but the project in Fort Collins was really interesting, where the land was owned underneath and that it made the townhomes more affordable. Those are really great projects, because they can build into, home ownership possibilities. People can create some equity. the fact that they remain affordable is really important. So I think, those kind of projects are really great for that middle income folks who are looking to buy but don't have, $60,000 or $80,000 for a down payment on a condo or a townhome. But yeah, I'm certainly supportive of looking for funding sources for housing.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kafalis.
Yes, I think it's important that we continue the conversations and more intentional about dedicated sources of revenue. There seems to be a bit of a clamor these days for lodging tax from groups like One Voice for Housing and others. So I think we need to have those conversations.
Okay.
And I know we're considering other options. Certainly, it would be interesting to see realistically what could be done with Senate Bill 001 and general fund property tax revenue. And I think the last point I'll make is that what I said earlier, it would be helpful to get an idea, an estimate of what kind of, what's a realistic dollar amount that could at least provide seed money that would leverage municipalities and other jurisdictions, whether it's regional or in the county, to create the most bang for the buck to do some of the work that's really essential.
Great.
Well, just because barriers were removed for general property fund on housing doesn't mean there's money.
Right.
And I know there's also one municipality said, oh, now you can use these fees for the clerk's office to use towards housing. Well, there is no money there. The clerk would have to make cuts, and that to me means that which pot, there's no more money really, in my opinion, coming right now. And what are we going to take it out of this pot to make those have to make more cuts? I mean, I think we have to be realistic with the public about this, and that we cannot fund and save housing right now. We need to really be loud and clear about that. But I do think one that we really need to explore the potential benefits is additional HUD entitlement grants through a home consortium. I do think that is really important for a lot of reasons because that is, I think, has not been utilized as it should have, maybe should have been or could have been. And so I think also when they say continuing funding gaps, we should monitor that and looking at that, especially because we know how federal funds are shifting. But we have to be realistic that county may not be able to go ahead and fund the whole gap.
Sure.
And I think that needs to be realistic. Exploring a lodging tax, we hear a lot about this, but talking to some other municipalities are running other ballot measures, and we have been looking at something. We have wildfire, which, we build houses, but if they burn down, we have to rebuild them, and that's going to be more, that's the thing we have to look at, our watershed. And I talk about water. Where our watersheds are already very much damaged. It's going to take a generation for them to recover. And when we look at that, others are looking at adding, a sales tax in this municipality, in this municipality. So now we're driving up the cost of goods and services for everyday folks. So I think that has to have a really careful conversation, because I think a lot of nonprofits are thinking, oh, well, we'll fund our nonprofits through a sales tax. And there's only so much to bear, and there are a lot of needs. Public safety, wildfire mitigation, all these other things. Where are we going to get that funding? And yes, housing is a need, but when we cut other services, it's just being realistic about there's only so much money in the pot. And we have to make some really hard choices and priorities. And so I think looking at the potential benefits of that HUD entitlement, I think it's really important. And I think, I guess that first one, potential local funding tools and determine the most appropriate, I think that's just looking at how we can evaluate funding streams for housing projects in peer cities and communities, but also bring that to a big discussion as a regional discussion about how are we going to do this together, because there is not right now enough in the pot by anyone's opportunity. When we talk about penciling out and talking to developers, are we sacrificing building codes and safety just to pencil out? And so there's just some balancing there. And so I'm a little bit more skeptical about how we're going to balance all of this. So that's where I'm at.
Sure.
So does that help?
Yeah, for
All
sure.
right, thank you.
For sure. That's great. So let's do a couple minutes here on preservation. Commissioner Cafalas, you brought up naturally occurring affordable housing. That is something that we consider part of preservation, including manufactured housing communities or mobile home parks. So a couple of our kind of specific questions were thinking about prioritizing preservation when allocating private activity bonds is one option that the county may have. So private activity bonds you're leveraging from the state. Those can go into helping finance new construction affordable, or they can go into preserving existing affordable housing. So that would be one opportunity. Specific other specific preservation efforts that you've heard about that you want to see, or specific priorities related to MHPs. So those were kind of our top 3 questions around this in there. We obviously have very limited time. So, but I would love any thoughts around preservation. Would love to hear your thoughts. And then again, as was mentioned before, we're happy to continue to take thoughts by email and anything else as well. I know we don't have a ton of time to probably fully flesh this out.
Yeah, I agree. So I would say let's let you maybe take really quick 30 seconds, concise, and then we can email you some
Great.
more. So,
Perfect.
Commissioner Stevens?
I don't know that we should use PABs to just prioritize preservation. I think we should kind of look at the full picture. I mean, I think that there's some cases that we may want to do that, but not all the time.
Okay.
I don't know any other specific preservation efforts, although there are some people that clearly, and Commissioner Cafalas has identified some people in some of the rural areas that may need a little bit more help with sort of home upkeep and, weatherization and energy efficiency and things like that. So I think that's an opportunity to help people keep their homes in working order. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.
Commissioner Cafalas?
I think I've made my points on this topic. I mean, manufactured housing is important. Single-family detached homes in rural areas are important that are older homes, older adults living in them. Whatever we can do to scale up our activities, whether it's weatherization or providing incentives to improve infrastructure, reduce the increase in lot rents and all the rest.
Great.
We don't want to lose that. We have, 44 mobile home parks in the county, 33, including the municipalities. So that's something we want to hold on to if we can.
Yep.
I think that we should just look at all options on this, and especially how can we leverage private activity bonds for whether it's preservation or where we're looking at new construction. I think mobile home parks, I think there's also, we've had that in place for those protections, but we just got an email from another one that just went up for sale in a certain part of the county. And I think that's going to have a deeper discussion. I do want to make sure that when we're doing weatherizing, especially for some of the rural and mountains, we want to be really means tested, I think, and also, the most greatest need, because I think there's also some things to do to maybe harden their homes and home and acquisition zone for to just protect their safety overall. So we're at 11 o'clock. So 7, how about we're just going to go ahead and maybe email you on this and continue this discussion. But I just wanted to say thank you for being here. I really appreciate the conversation. And it's certainly, Molly, just been great to have this. And I know we kind of probably put a little more discussion in the front half. I'm going to give just a closing sentence to Lorenda, anything you want to say. And then Aaliyah, I know you probably have a lot to say, but I think we could do a follow-up email.
I was going to say, I think maybe a follow-up meeting after you all have more time to digest this. Maybe we'll do another hour where we can continue the conversation. How about that?
I think that's a great idea. All right. Well, thank you all for this conversation. Thank you to the staff in the room, and thank you, Aaliyah and Molly. Really some thoughtful dialogue here. And 11 o'clock, we are adjourned.
Thank you so much.